It's Friday, and it can only mean one thing. It's time for the Movie Pope Show. And here are your hosts, Lee Suchek and Luka Suar. And now, let's make some noise for the gruesome twosome, the pedantic pair, Lee and Luka.
Hello, and welcome to another season of the Movie Pope podcast. We are at season 6, and in case you didn't notice, we ditched the old jazzy intro. It was a little bit passé. It got a little bit stale, and we decided to go a little bit retro, a little bit disco this time around. And you'll notice that you actually get to see our faces on the intro too, not just a little cartoon logo that you can sort of approximate as us. But new season, new episodes, new intro. Everything's good to go here. We've got a lot of content in the pipeline, and we actually do have someone who will eventually be joining us on our regular Friday show. So if you're intrigued, hit the subscribe button so you will be kept up to date, because she is very eager to join us in reviewing movies moving forward. But to get started, Lee, there is no other movie that I felt would be a better way to kick off season 6 than Project Hail Mary, right? And this is a movie that we went to go see in theaters, which was quite phenomenal. And at the same time, it was a great movie, but I didn't think it would actually do as well as it did in the box office.
Yeah, I agree. Now, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, like when you take a look at that, like you would just think to yourself, oh well, this was an MGM production from from Amazon, all that stuff. It's got Ryan Gosling. It's a little bit goofy, but we'll roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as you want to go in and just thinking, well, there's really nothing to it. When you watch the movie, like, it's actually very impressive.
Yeah.
But we saw what, a week or two ago, Lee.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah, it's got to be like 2 weeks now. Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say that there's a lot of it that still resonates with me, and so much so that the day after seeing the movie, I actually went and bought a Project Hail Mary hat.
Ooh.
Now, just full disclosure here, I went onto the official website and saw that the price was $50, right? I will tell you right now, I did not spend $50 on a hat. I found an alternative, but it's very similar to the one that Ryan Gosling wears in the movie. So if you follow us, on our socials, or if you are a regular subscriber to the channel, at some point you'll probably get to see a picture of the hat that I bought. But Lee, what were your thoughts? Because I know we did a trailer reaction, before the movie came out. What were your initial thoughts after seeing this movie?
Yeah, so I think, to kind of start off, right, something that was shocking to me, right? I don't know if it shocked you, right? Because we had kind of this, opening, right, where we see Ryan Gosling's character, right? He's got amnesia. He's on the Hail Mary, right? So that's the name of the ship. And immediately we get kind of like a bunch of little funny things that happen, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That's kind of an interesting way to start it, right? Kind of starting with humor right away. And then as the movie progressed, I was like, is this like a straight up comedy? Was this what I was expecting? And I had to go back and think, what was I expecting when I went to go see this, right? So I went back to the trailer, I watched it, and I was like, no, they kind of threw in some funny parts at the end of the trailer, but I felt like they're going to play it pretty straight throughout. But they didn't, right? This, to me, was just a comedy in space, right? Which I have no problem with, but I wasn't expecting it. What about you? Were you kind of maybe taken back by how much comedy was in this film?
I mean, I wouldn't say it was all comedy. There were moments that were a bit heartwarming.
Oh, sure, yes, of course, yeah. No, I won't quite say, yeah, it wasn't a straight up comedy like you said, right? But it was. I would say there was a lot more comedy thrown in than I was expecting.
I mean, yeah, because Ryan Gosling, he plays Dr. Ryland Grace, right? Who's this reluctant hero, right?
Yes.
And you kind of get the feeling of this in a weird way, this is a guy who is in a no-win situation, right? It's kind of like a Kobayashi Maru. Like, he's pretty much kind of put himself in a situation where he can't really get out of it. There's no win for him, right? Because if he stays on Earth, he's screwed like the rest of humanity. But if he goes and does his job or does the mission, there's no way for him to get back home. So it's like, it's like a damn if you do, damn if you don't kind of scenario.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, right. And I think that that is absolutely, how the movie kind of gets there, right? Because you're absolutely right. I always felt bad for Grace, and I always feel like it was weird. They try to kind of paint him as cowardly person, but I feel like this is what a normal person would be like, right? Because really that's where a lot of the kind of story happens, right? And the story is told non-linearly, right? So there's kind of a lot of flashbacks that kind of get moved back and forth between. So I'm going to try to help break things down in a way that kind of at least makes sense from a discussion. So we're not constantly going back and forth the time and make things confusing, right? Because you're right. So we meet, Ryland Grace, right? Grace, as he goes by. Can't say I've met. Have you ever met a male Grace before?
Well, as long as his first name isn't Grace, I don't really.
No, I know. Yeah, but it's not a name that I've never met a guy that goes by Grace. Let's phrase it like that, right? So, yes, his first name is indeed Ryland, and he's this molecular biologist, right? And he's kind of been shunned by academia, right? He's kind of on the outskirts now. He's, a school teacher. And he's a school teacher that is pretty much being selected to save the world, right? So he's part of the great minds that get brought together. And I'm gonna kind of just fast forward through just the kind of the science aspect, right? Because this is, I think, something that was important in the books, and I feel like the movie, for the most part, it just wants to get to the story of him and his alien friend, right? So, but in essence, what we have here, so the sun is dimming, right? And the sun dimming means that, hey, we're about to hit the next ice age, right? And the next ice age, it's gonna suck, right? Now, maybe in the Carolinas, the next ice age will kind of keep it under 100, but for other parts of the world, right, it might totally suck. So they find out that there's this organism, right? They call it an astrophage, and it's taking the sun's energy. So they have to figure out a way of, hey, we have this astrophage. We need to figure out how to deal with this situation, this organism that's kind of sapping the sun's energy. So they identify there's this star called Tau Ceti, which is not being impacted by this astrophage, like all the other stars that we can see, right? So how was that synopsis? Did I hit everything important, Luka? I want to make sure I'm not leaving out anything in the science part of this.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of go through that process of trying to figure out what's going on. I'm actually kind of impressed that they managed to figure it all out. Really.
Yeah, in the time frame they do too, right? So, it's funny, you kind of talk about him being a reluctant, player in this, and it's interesting, why we see so many films where that is the case, right? It's this guy that's retired, or this guy that's maybe kind of on the outskirts of what is the social norm. He gets kind of brought in to save stuff, right? I think if you're thinking nowadays, I'm like, hey, who are we gonna bring in, right? Now, I don't know a whole lot of scientists. I can't name a whole bunch of names, right? In my brain, it's like, oh, we'll just get, Neil deGrasse Tyson and, Bill Nye the Science Guy. They're going to come together and solve this issue. But no, we got this teacher that's going to come in and save the day. And it's just, it's, I think, fun to see these types of characters get thrust into this role. Because I feel like they act pretty much how you or me would react, right? Like, hey, what if someone was to come to the doorstep and be like, hey, we need you to review a movie, otherwise the world's gonna end, and being like, well, shit, I'm out of this, right? I don't want all that pressure. I don't need to have this in my life. And yeah, so now I was curious, like, have you read the books?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so and I haven't read either, right? So and I apologize because I think that you know, I don't want to step on anyone's toes or mislead anyone. But something that I did see at least some, I guess, feedback on is the books focus a lot more on the science, right? And I feel like in the movie they kind of just rushed through it, right? And I think that this was a good choice, right? Because I think that really most audiences, right, they're not going to be bogged down in this. And when you have this film that's what was it, like 2 hours? It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes or something, right? It's pretty. Do you remember how long it was?
Yeah, it was probably like 2 hours.
2 hours and 37 minutes. There.
Yeah, I
we
was
go.
like,
So
yeah,
2 hours and 37 minutes. So
well, minus the credits. So.
yeah, minus the credits. You're right. Yes, minus the credits. Right. So, so you know, so I'm glad that they kind of went that route because I feel like when you're doing a movie like this, if you get too in the weeds with the science, it's gonna make it boring, right? So, knowing that the book focused more on the science, would you like to see them maybe do more on Earth with the science, or do you feel like the movie made the right choice by trying to fast forward through that so we could just get to kind of him and our alien friend coming up later?
I mean, I kind of wish they would have explained more how that engine worked because because when I did some research on this, they said because in the movie they said it took about 13 years for them to get from Earth to Tau Ceti, right?
Yeah.
So the engine must have been really really advanced, going close to
Yes.
light speed or sublight speed. If we were using normal human technology, like for us to get from Earth to Tau Ceti, we're looking at 100,000 years. So I'd be very much curious for them to go in a little bit more detail as to how they actually got the ship to go as fast as it did, because because astronomically, like, it's pretty close to us, but even when you're traveling those distances, it can take quite a long time.
Yes.
So
yes.
that's the only thing I probably would have been more that probably would have satisfied my curiosity was how exactly do they go about building this engine, because all they said was they're using the astrophage bacteria to kind of like push the ship along, but
yes.
It's like, yeah, you could go into a little bit more details to how exactly it's gonna push the ship to sublight speed, but
yeah, also really sketchy, right? Because you barely know anything about this organism, but it's gonna be your primary means of a fuel source to get to where you need to go. Very questionable, but hey, in a situation like that, I guess you don't have a lot of choices, right? So, and honestly, it makes you wonder, like, if they didn't have this microorganism that did this, the Earth was doomed, right? So, I guess kind of a convenient plot reason to have this astrophage do what it does. So, back in the present, right? So we have, Grace. He's on the spaceship, the Hail Mary. We see that there's some deceased astronauts that are there, right? So this was a 3-man crew that was going there. And we don't really know anything about the crew, right? And it's a minor nitpick, right? But I will say, was it weird to you that they like introduced these astronauts and like you do see them, right? Like in the flashbacks, but they pretty much have no story significance. They're just like there, they just kind of die. Well, I was curious, why do you feel like they even bothered to include them, knowing that they're just going to be out of it, right? Because they had like the two guys, or they had the one dude, right? And then you had Lily from the AT&T commercials, right? I won't even try to say her name, the actress's name. But why? I don't know. I thought that it was kind of weird that you bring these characters along, but he never really he doesn't have a connection with them. On choice. I don't know. Did that kind of bug you that we never found out more about them? Or were you okay with them just being kind of like, a bunch of red shirts?
I mean, I'm curious as to how they died.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they all
Grace live.
Yeah, because they all got put in the little cryo, I guess, like the cryo sleep or whatever. Like kind of kind of similar to what you see in the Alien movies.
Yes,
but I'm just curious as to how they met their end. Like,
yeah. Hopefully they didn't just sit there like trapped in this tube, being like conscious and just slowly withered away. Oh god, that's really depressing. Now I kind of regret thinking about that. So, but anyways, right? So Grace gives them, their nice little, funeral out in space, and he makes it to the star, right? The Tau Ceti, and lo and behold, he's not the only person that is there, at least not in the, I guess, conventional sense, right? So there's another ship that's there, and they kind of had this like funny sequence, right, where he's like trying to, like, I guess, kind of evade them, but the other ship does not let that happen, and eventually the other ship ends up docking with the Hail Mary, and this is where we have our two really main characters, right? We got Grace, and then we meet this rock creature, right? From the planet Iridia that is called Rocky, right? So we got these two that come together, and they kind of go through kind of all the tropes of, what happens when you meet someone that speaks another language or you're not familiar with. So they go through all this, quirky stuff of like learning the language and everything. But in essence, they go through all this, and you find out that Rocky is also there for the exact same reason, right? So he's on the same mission as Grace is, where he needs to save his own planet. And to do this, they need to figure out why this particular planet or this particular sun is not being impacted by everything. So let's talk about the chemistry, because this is really the heart of the film, right? Like we kind of hinted on this a little bit earlier, but man, these interactions that the two characters have are great, right? They're two totally different species, right? But they come together for a singular cause, and they just have such this great dialogue back and forth. And all I can ever think about now is fist my bump, right? I mean, the amount of laughs that the audience got from, some of the things that they go through, and, kind of learning all the quirks of the English language. It was a ton of fun, right? It was so much fun. It was a lot of fun to see them interact. They kind of gloss over like all this, hey, how do we like learn these languages, and, putting on the computer to do all this. But, I don't think that's the purpose of the film. They definitely don't go as heavy into the science. But what do you think of the relationship between Grace and Rocky, right? Well, how did the relationship go?
Rocky is he's technically a silicone-based life form, but I told you this in theaters that the so as you said, Rocky, he's an Iridian from the star system 40 Eridani, right? And it kind of goes to show just how big of a Star Trek fan Andy Weir is, and this is me saying it, because because the interaction between Grace and Rocky is first contact, right? So in Star Trek lore, the Vulcans are from 40 Eridani, and in Star Trek lore, in the year 2063, humans make first contact with the Vulcans. So there's a bit of a parallel going on between that, and I can't help but think that Andy Weir kind of inserted that in just to see if anybody would get that Star Trek reference.
I'm sure there's plenty of people that knew those Trekkies would get that, Luka. I don't think you've got anything to worry about that.
And listen, I'm just saying, like, I was just pleased to see that, because it just goes to show that, that this is someone who genuinely appreciates, what what's been going on, before him, and kind of, calling back to one of the most famous first contact scenes in sci-fi lore.
Yeah.
But I will also say too, because as we're following Grayson's mission, I mean, this is a guy who's pretty much all alone. He's been cast out into the depths of space, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's got nobody to talk to. He's pretty much just trying to figure out how to survive on his own without going crazy, right? So, so when he meets Rocky, it's a chance for him to kind of build that connection, because as you're watching the flashbacks, you kind of have to feel bad for him, because, as much as they preach, oh, you're doing this for the betterment of mankind, you're doing this to save humanity, they pretty much treat him like shit, especially as you get close to the end of the movie. So it's like when he builds that relationship with Rocky, it's like, this is a clean slate. Maybe these guys aren't going to treat me the same way that the members of my own species are treating me.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I think that's a great point, right? Because this is really his opportunity, right? Because he's all alone, and by all definitions, right, he's pretty much all alone on Earth as well, right? Like he, is in a relationship. I think they even mentioned like he doesn't even have a dog, right? So I think they make it very clear that he's kind of a loner for this, and why a mission like this would make sense for someone like him, because the fact that he doesn't have family. I guess the whole idea is that
it's kind of remember when we saw that movie Mickey 17 last year? I mean, he is metaphorically an expendable.
Yes.
Really. Like this is just someone who, as much as they want to like butter him up and say, well, you wrote this great research paper and you were an outcast by academia because you have a pretty abrasive personality. At the end of the day, he's someone that they deem, expendable. He's someone that they'll just cast aside because, he's really a nobody in the situation. So it's so it's one of those things where you kind of root for Grace and Rocky because, at the end of the day, Grace doesn't really have anybody else, right? I mean, he's pretty much been, I mean, I don't want to say rejected, but he's pretty much been like an outcast by the human race, really.
Yes, absolutely. So it is, I think, kind of the contrast of those flashbacks to what we see. I definitely kind of adds that extra level of, this guy's probably been looking for someone like Rocky for a long time, probably all of his life. And he's finally getting that opportunity to do that. So the two of them, right, they start to work together, right? So they have to kind of, deal with some of the challenges of them kind of cohabitating in the same area, right? Because Rocky's area is hazardous to Grace and vice versa, right? So they have to kind of create their own means of being able to kind of work with each other to kind of exist. And as they kind of do their research together, they find out that there's this other organism, right, that's actually feeding on the astrophage, which is why City is not being impacted, right? There's I guess like a moon or something, or there's something that's nearby.
Yeah, it's a gas giant. Yeah.
Yes, right. So it's a nearby thing that has this other organism that's pretty much eating the astrophage. So so they have to obviously go get some samples because hey, this seems to be the reason that this is happening, and if you have this organism, then you, in theory, have the solution, right? So they go on this mission to get it right. And I will say this, right? This movie has some truly amazing, like, just the visuals of it are really impressive, right? I think when we see him kind of do that, like, kind of space mission outside, it really made me feel like this is exactly why you go to like cinemas, right? To just see something like this on the big screen, right? To see kind of the how they're kind of doing everything. It's truly just eye candy, right? And it was so awesome to see. So he's out there on the ship trying to collect these organisms. And it's obviously a very perilous thing because the ship is literally just like flying around, and he's trying to sit out there and do a spacewalk. So he ends up, getting the creatures, and he makes it inside. However, he gets rendered unconscious, right? So he gets knocked out as he's trying to bring everything on board. And Rocky, right? He's got his little he's in like a little hamster wheel kind of, right? A little hamster bubble, right? Because that's how he, exists and everything. And, even though Rocky can't, speak English, obviously, right? We hear, him speak through the computer. But we see the scene where he kind of burst out of the bubble to save Grace and bring up to safety. And you can see, like, how much the environment is hurting him, right? Like, you start to see him, almost melt. right? And he brings like Grace unconscious to like a safe area before he kind of I can use the term like he pretty much is left on the brink of death, for lack of better words. And I'm not gonna lie, right? So, we saw this with two of our friends, right? Like we always do. And one of our friends that I know had read the book. She left right before the sequence, and when she left, I thought to myself, like, "Oh shit, something bad's gonna happen," because she's leaving because she doesn't want to see what we're about to experience. And it was kind of funny when it happened. I did find out afterwards that that wasn't the case for her. She just had to go to the bathroom. But the whole time I'm like, oh God, something bad's gonna happen. And I'm not gonna lie, man. Like I got emotional watching poor Rocky sit there and struggle to save Grace, right? And you never imagine, like, I'm just like watching an alien creature, right? I don't know who this is or what this is. Like they don't, it's just this rock creature on the screen. But man, like the relationship that they build in such a short time makes that scene so hard. So I want to see, Luka, how close were you, or did you tear up watching Rocky sacrifice himself to save Grace?
No, I didn't, but I did.
Oh, come on.
No, I didn't, but but it was pretty nice to see that Rocky was one to, risk, life and limb to save his friend, right?
Yes.
It kind of harkens back to what we see at the end of the Wrath of Khan, right, where Spock, willingly sacrifices himself to save Kirk and everybody on the Enterprise. It's just one of those. It's just one of those things where if you're invested in the characters and you follow along and you kind of roll through the punches like like they do, they become a part of you, right? And that's the reason why for me, Grace and Rocky are kind of resonate with me, is because we know what it's like to be alone. We know what it's like to be rejected by the people who we thought cared about us, right? So when you have these two characters, come into contact and they have that connection, it's like, well, yeah, they may not understand each other, or they may not, even look remotely similar, but they can still have that connection because they both understand what it's like to be in that situation, right? So I kind of, so for me, I can empathize with the both of them, because we've all been in that situation at one point or another, right? And we all feel lonely sometimes, because even when we're with other people, we kind of feel like no one gets us. And and to your point, in a weird way, the only person who really understands Grace is Rocky, really.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, Rocky kind of understands Grace also.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it was, like I said, a very touching scene, right? And I think it just shows, how quickly that bond is they've kind of like, grown together in that short time that they're kind of doing the, all the experiments to figure out what's going on. So, so Rocky is luckily, right, not dead, right? So he is alive, right? We don't kind of know that, right? I think it's kind of played like we think he's healing or sleeping, but we're not too sure. So while we're waiting for Rocky to recover, Grace ends up breeding this new organism, right? And it's called the Talmeba, right? So they are breeding this so they can bring it back to their respective planets, where hopefully this is going to solve their crisis. So once Rocky recovers, right, I think we all were super happy when we kind of see him pop up. And I like how, there's these scenes, right, of Grace, and he's like kind of sitting there and he's just falling asleep next to Rocky's kind of like little enclosure, right? Because that's something that we saw earlier, was that, they wanted, or I guess for Rocky's species, right, there's a lot of concerns over dying while you're sleeping, right? Or something's going to happen to you while you're sleeping. So, they kind of like create this bond. And I think it was very nice to see Grace be there next to him through that, right? So once again, I think a very, strong positive message about the bond that they have created as they're doing this. So as they figure out and they're about to separate ways, Grace kind of, admits to Rocky that for him, this mission was always a one-way mission, right? He was never meant to make it back. He was meant to do the research and to send everything back to Earth, and that's how things are going to happen. And Rocky, like the true bro that he is, right? He, gives up some of his fuel source, right? Some of his astrophage to give to Grace at the expense of Rocky taking a few more years to get back home. Which, I mean, it brought Grace to tears, right? I mean, probably something where he's never been shown this level of kindness before. Even his own people sent him to his death, so to say. But here you have this person that you barely know that's, putting everything on the line to help you. So truly a touching sequence. And, we have them kind of reluctantly, going their separate ways. And I thought to myself, like, oh, wow, this is great, right? They're going to have this, great connection. And the movie's over. But then it wasn't, right? So I'm not gonna lie, right? Were you expecting kind of this other incident to happen? Because I'm not gonna lie, I thought like everything was wrapped up. I'm like, okay, I guess that's it. Like, great movie, thoroughly enjoyed it. Hopefully they find a way to communicate in the future. But then there's like this extra little bit. Were you expecting that, or did you feel like that was like, I guess, kind of tacked on there, so to say, at the end?
Well, I kind of got the feeling that something else might happen.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't like I figured it wasn't going to be, as easy as as them finding the solution than him going back home, because because they kind of build up this whole idea that, oh yeah, this is a one-way thing. I think some of the astronauts even say, there's it's not too bad of a way to die, and the German scientist even says, you'll be remembered on Earth as a hero. So it's kind of like the expectation is, we're going to treat you like a dead person anyway. So it's not like so it's not like there's no point coming back home, because, well, we're going to have to explain to people, we've been telling you for 13 years he's dead, but turns out he's not dead. And well, I mean, deal with that.
Yep. No, I agree. Definitely, at least for myself, right? I mean, I do agree. I thought something a little bit more was going to happen. I don't think I expected maybe at the level that was going to happen, right? So as Grace is returning back to Earth, they're cow amoebas, right? They start to, I guess they start to like eat through like the container that they're in to go after the astrophage, right? Because that was its food source. So, Grace realizes that, oh no, if this is happening here, Rocky's ship is totally made of this element that's used to enclose them. So obviously Rocky's in danger. And this to me was, there was a lot of really good scenes throughout this film, but this one really to me sticks out, right? Because there's kind of this like Grace kind of coming up with how he's going to choose what to do. And you kind of get this last little bit of a flashback regarding what happened on Earth, right? So it was something that we weren't sure about, and then we finally got some closure on what it was, right? So while back on Earth, right, there's this accident that happened that caused the original crew of the Hail Mary to die, right? Or some of them, or all of them, I don't remember, but like in essence, they had to replace the crew, right? Or at least they have to replace the one position. And they offered to Grace, right? And Grace, and I'm going to say this, I think for a lot of people, Grace probably has the same reaction that we do. Like, no, I don't want to die. I don't want to go on this mission. And he's pretty much forced, right, to go on this mission, right? So this is why he kind of has that amnesia at the start of the film. It's because he was drugged on Earth and pretty much forced to go on this mission on the Hail Mary, right? So I really loved how, as he's trying to decide what to happen, his whole kind of past gets kind of juxtaposed with this, where, he was kind of, I don't want to use the term a coward, right? I know the movie tries to talk him up as being a coward, even though I feel like legitimately a normal human reaction to being like, hey, we're going to send you on this mission to your death. I think a lot of people would have qualms for that, even if it, meant the good for a lot of other people. But I love how he kind of is there and he's like makes the choice that, hey, you know what? I'm gonna be brave. I'm gonna go save my friend, right? So he ends up, sending, his research materials and the Talmiba back to Earth, and he goes out in space to go find Rocky's ship and to pretty much save him, right? And we see that, kind of the movie has this closing where, Grace is now living on Iridia, right? Iridia is the name of the planet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So he's living on the planet Iridia, right? And the Iridians, right, have made this like really nice environment for him, which is pretty much like him, like at home. And you see that Rocky, has been hanging out with Grace, and help kind of create this, and they've been working on the Hail Mary so Grace could get back home to Earth. And the movie kind of ends with Rocky letting him know that the Hail Mary is now all fixed and he could go home. And Grace is like, you know what? I'm going to kind of wait and see what I decide, right? And it kind of, ends with Grace just kind of like standing there, and he's teaching a bunch of the little Iridian children, right? Or little small rock creatures. And we see him sitting there teaching them. So, now, I did want to ask you this, right? Because this is interesting. I was talking with my friend, and I'm going to name drop him. Tabby, if you listen to this, I know you listen to some of our stuff, right? I'm going to ask this question because I didn't think like this. But I was curious, Luka, do you feel like at the end, was Grace really thinking if he was going to stay in Iridia, or do you think he was eventually going to go home? What do you think?
Well, that's something that I will have to think about later because this movie has done something that I thought I would never do. It actually has led me to writing fan fiction based on Project Hail Mary. So hopefully within the next 6 months to a year, you'll probably see episodes of it on this channel because it's one of those things that I can't really give you an answer right now because I'm turning it over in my head and I'm just thinking, after everything he's been through, why would he want to go back?
Yes.
But at the same time, it's like, maybe you do want to go back because after a while you do get homesick. So it's not an answer that I can give. So the question that I would ask you in turn is, objectively, when you look at this objectively, do you agree with the Project Hail Mary team leader's assessment? Do you feel like her hand was forced and she kind of had to make this movement because because I kind of feel like if you're on a timetable, like I said earlier, there are no good options. You kind of have to go with the one that's least desirable. What are your thoughts about her decision process?
100%. Good for her, right? Good for her, right? And I know we haven't really talked about, right? Because so it's Ava Stratt, right? So she is the one that's kind of putting together Project Hail Mary. And honestly, Luka, I have no problem with what she did, right? And I know that sounds terrible, right? But you brought up a good point, right? This is, I think, one of those things where you're doing this for the betterment of the masses, right? This is a very common thing that people decide upon. Is it, worth killing one person to save hundreds, right? That's a very
the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Yes, exactly, right? Perfect, right? So this multiple comes up quite a bit, right? And I think you could know where I head on the spectrum with this is that she indeed made the right call, right? Because he wasn't initially the plan, right? So she clearly went into this with the mindset that, hey, you know what? We're going to leverage him for this expertise. And then once it was done with, that was it, right? His usefulness was gone, right? So he was there to study them, give them a plan, but he was never meant to execute the mission until this crazy thing happens, right? This, incident that happens that causes this massive explosion. And really, he's pretty much, forced to do it, right? And I think that was something that was, I think, just a really strong, I think it was a better inclusion in the books, right? So in the books, he pretty much is like told like, hey, I'll go, but I want you to get rid of my memory, right? Like he wants to not remember all this stuff. In this, I like the fact that he's kind of just forced into it, because I think that makes him being brave and going after Rocky that much stronger, knowing that he pretty much tried to shy away from this, but now he's fully embracing this mission, right? To save humanity and to really save his friend. So I had no problem with her. So what do you think, Luka? Did you agree with Strat on what we needed to happen there?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, she's not really thinking of herself. She's thinking of the planet overall, right?
Yes.
So it's not like, and as I'm watching the movie, like she puts on this facade, and you're like, okay, she wants to come off as this hard, no nonsense person, right? So initially, you kind of want to see her in an unsympathetic light, but there are those little moments where it's like, okay, well, maybe she's not that big of a dick, maybe she does have some warm spots. Obviously the big one was when she did the karaoke song. It's like, oh,
yes,
and Grace actually says, oh, okay, so she's not that big of a hard ass. Like she actually does have a personality.
Yes.
But at the same time, you kind of have to feel a bit for Grace, because
100%.
he was going in with one expectation, and they kind of changed course midway and had another expectation, right?
Yeah.
Now, to her credit, she did disclose, and she said she did say, "Hey, this is what we need you to do," right?
Mm-hmm.
And and to Grace's credit, or to Grace's point, like he did point out and say, "Well, yeah, this is my decision, and it's a hard no," but at the end of the day, I mean, whatever the situation is, whatever decision you make, it has to have the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people, right? It's utilitarianism. So, so to go back to your earlier question, so when Grace, when Grace decides, I need time to think, I think he's already made his decision. It's not like it's not like he's having to think that long and hard about what he wants to do. What I would say, if you want to make it even more poignant, is the fact that that the Hail Mary, when he goes through the process of trying to save Rocky, something happens to the Hail Mary, and he has no way of getting back home, right? So so either way, like he's not able to go back home, but he's not dead either. It's just he needs to create a new life somewhere else. That's the only thing I didn't really care too much for, was that he had the option of going home. I kind of would have liked it better if that option had been taken away.
Yes. No, I agree, right? And I think, as I thought more about this, right, and I think that even my opinions somewhat kind of changed throughout the review, just chatting with you and chatting with some other friends about the film. I think that there is like a very strong argument that, and like I said, this is based upon strictly the film. I'm, not discussing the book in regards to kind of what happens there. But I mean, I think you make a great argument that at the end of the day, I mean, what does Grace really have to look forward to, right? We know that, he's kind of this outcast. We know that he has kind of this, his demeanor is kind of like put people at odds with him. And even Strat even says like, hey, you got nothing, right? So now he's on this new planet, and he has a great friend. He has his ability to sit there and teach these little ones about everything. So I think you make a strong argument that, I mean, he's found his true home, right? This is his true home now. So I think it's a kind of an interesting thing. I think the book kind of implies more that he does stay on the planet, as opposed to going back. Whereas I feel in the movie, I think they do a better job of keeping it more ambiguous, right? And when I guess the way I kind of interpreted it as they were talking, I kind of thought that he was obviously planning to go back home, right? Because why would you have them working on the ship if your plan is to go back home? I think that's kind of a dick move. But I think that was something where the movie left it a little bit more ambiguous, whereas the book, I think, kind of made it a little bit more clear. So, but yeah, I mean, I think he found his true home, right? on this new planet. So, but yep.
Well, I was going to say, because as I'm watching this movie, it very much reminds me of Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's man standing against the grandeur of space, right?
Yes.
And as you're looking at the shots that they make, it just goes to show, like, Grace in the Hail Mary, they're just specks, in the grand scheme of the cosmos, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
My favorite shot is when Grace is hovering above that gas giant. It is such a perfect shot.
Oh yes.
And I've been trying to replicate that on AI, and newsflash, AI doesn't always work. So anybody who's touting it as like the next best thing, you're going to have to spend a lot of coin to go through all these attempts to get the shot that you want, because it's so perfectly done. I would also say too, I mean, that this, that this kind of also speaks to people on so many levels, right? Because we've already mentioned that Grace is an outcast, and we can all empathize and sympathize with being outcast at one point or another. But I think another thing that we need to take a look at is the fact that that even someone who is an outcast and like Grace, they need human connection. They crave connection, right?
Yes.
And as I'm watching these scenes of him just floating around and having to figure out how to pilot a ship, because this guy's a molecular biologist. He doesn't know anything about flying a ship. It's one of those things where it's like you kind of have to feel for him, because he's basically doing the job of like 6 different people on that ship, right? So when he's in that little cockpit, he kind of feels out of his element. But when he's in the lab, it's like, oh, this is my home base. This is somewhere I can like hang out for quite a while. Yeah, it's one of those. I mean, this is one of those movies where, like, you can just like go back and see it over and over again, and you'll walk away with a different perspective because you'll catch something that you never thought about the first time around. For me, so at the beginning of the movie where the team is basically telling Grace, this is affecting a bunch of different stars, not just our own, with the exception of Tau Ceti, right? The reason why I'm writing this fan fiction stuff right now is that I would really like to see, like, how do they go about getting this to other worlds, right? Because because when you start out the movie, like, Grace has no idea that there are other inhabited worlds, right? He's just going out there to save his own world, but then he encounters Rocky, and it's like, well, now the stakes have gotten a lot much higher, because I'm no longer just doing it for my world. I'm doing it for Rocky's world and possibly other worlds around them.
I got an answer for you, Luka. Called a sequel. Sequel where we have Rocky and Grace gallivanting out in space, going to other planets to save them. That's how they do that. Bam.
Oh, that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. I'm writing this stuff.
Oh, look at that! Hey, great minds think alike, right? I like that. So.
Oh, you're not doing anything, Lee. You're just sitting there, watching anime. I'm actually the one doing all the work over here. So
I didn't even say anything other than that was the same thing. Okay, but yeah. So I think that is, that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and we'll wrap it up. So going into this, right? So I really liked The Martian, right? Thought that was fantastic movie. And obviously now this is another book adaptation, right, from the same author, Andy Weir, right? So once again, another great adaptation, right? So I think I'm going to give this I'm going to say a 4.3 out of 5. I think that this was a really strong film. I thoroughly enjoyed kind of the camaraderie, obviously, between our 2 characters, right, between Rocky and Grace. I think they were a fantastic grouping there. Kind of the bond that they have, and really both of them, right, being able to put everything on the line to save each other, right? Because this is very much bigger than both of them, right? Both of them have very strong reasons to come back alive, but they're willing to risk everything for their newfound friend. So I think it has just such a strong positive message. I think probably the only parts that kind of get a little bit in the weeds is, kind of them going through all the sciencey stuff, which, I think is needed, right? We do need to understand everything that's happening and why it's happening. But obviously, it's doesn't really have a greater impact on the film. I think maybe there was a little bit more you could have done with minimizing some of the flashbacks on Earth and maximizing more of the screen time with the two of them. But like I said, kind of a minor nitpick in the grand scheme of things, but just something I thought about. Because, for the most part, like, we don't really see much of the characters, right? We have these two astronauts. The whole time I was kind of thinking that, maybe he had this like strong connection with them back on Earth. And, it makes it so when they're dead, it kind of like really sucks as you as the audience to find out that they were maybe really close together and now they're gone. But they were kind of never really there, right? I think Strat probably has the most significant story on Earth. But I would say then even that was minimal. But like I said, outside of like some, minor nitpicks, I mean, this was really a great film. And, I think it kind of compares very favorably to The Martian, where, The Martian, I think, was obviously a lot more, I would say, played straight, right? So not as much of a comedy. Mark Watney obviously has a lot of fun quips that he does, but not the purpose of the film. And that one was, very much like man versus nature, where this is, more of a buddy cop comedy, so to say. But, I enjoyed them both, two very different films with two very different feels. But both of them, I think, had a very strong backing. And I'm definitely excited to see, I think Andy Weir does have another book out that was kind of sandwiched between these two. And if I recall correctly, it's like something about like, it's like deals with some people on the moon living in a city and following someone. So I don't know if that one will ever get adapted.
Coincidentally, it is called Artemis, and at the time of
Yes.
we're recording, Artemis is currently on its way to the moon.
Yep, absolutely right. So maybe a positive sign that gets adapted. So, but I mean, obviously, two really strong, film adaptations that come out. So I'm excited for that. So yeah, that's my final vote. So Luka, I'll let you give your final thoughts there.
Well, I'm going to give it a 4.7 out of 5. It's well done. I think this is it's a good way to do a science fiction movie without having to resort to, the cheesy tropes that you would see in other sci-fi films. It kind of like I alluded to earlier. It's reminiscent of 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it's also reminiscent of Tarkovsky's Solaris, right? Because you're dealing with two protagonists who are, at the end of the day, very lonely people who are struggling just to make a connection, right? I mean, at least in the case of this movie, right, it's a positive relationship that he has, because he's able to forge a very good connection with an alien creature and actually create something that's meaningful, right? Whereas with what you see with 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's really ambiguous in terms as to what the overall connection is, because there is some sort of connection, but you're not really quite sure what becomes of it. Whereas in Solaris, it's almost parasitic. It's like, Dr. Kelvin has a manifestation of his dead wife, but he's not really quite sure of how he's going to process what's going on, and it kind of leads to this sort of the sort of like situation where he's not quite sure if he really is sane, or if he's trying to come to terms with what's happening, but he's not doing a very good job. Whereas here it's like Dr. Grace, it's kind of simplistic, because at least here we know that he didn't have much going on Earth, but now that he's on Fort Eridani, it's a lot more impactful, a lot more fruitful. But I already mentioned this earlier, but I kind of feel like the biggest gripe I have is is giving him that option to go home. I felt like if that option had been taken away from him, it would have been far more impactful and kind of and because at least then you could see like the choices that he makes. It's because of the fact that he knows he can't go home, so he has to make a new life for himself. Granted, even though he does have that choice to go home, he's still able to make that meaningful relationship because it's a choice that he's making on his own, as opposed to previously where the choice had been taken away from him, right? Because even when he tells them, "I don't want to go. I'm sorry, I don't want to do this," that it's almost a moot point because they're not only giving him the option to choose, but that choice has no resonance, really.
Yeah, he had the illusion of choice, so to say.
Right. So at least here, the Iridians are not really. We see in the movie they're not capable of behaving in the same way that humans are behaving. So what you get from the Iridians is far more straightforward and far more impactful than what Grace had been dealing with back home. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those movies where it's like you can appreciate the simple storyline because it's very easy to follow. You can appreciate the shots because it's just majestic. Special effects are phenomenal.
Yeah.
I would even say the biggest compliment that I'll get is the way that they designed the ship. I think it's one of the most phenomenal, one of the most beautiful spaceships ever put to screen, really. I would put it up there with the Enterprise from the original series, of course, and I'd also put it up there with the ship from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So like for me, like those would be like the top 3 ships that are perfectly designed in my book, right? because it's just so functional and it's just utilitarian, but it's so elegant at the same time, right? Because you can believe that this is a ship that could be conceivably constructed in our time, right?
Yeah,
and if you're looking at the Artemis spacecraft, it looks pretty similar to what we see with Project Hail Mary, right? So it's not too far-fetched to see humanity building a ship similar to that. Although another gripe that I have is I wish they would go a little bit more detail as to how the astrophage drive works, because the way they describe it, it's like eating and it's farting across space. I was like, well, you have to be a pretty big fart in order to push you along, right? Because like I said earlier, like if
space cows, right?
Right,
cows like fart.
Right, because like I said earlier, if you're going to take a trip to Tau Ceti, right now with current technology, you're going to be there it's going to take you quite a while, Yeah, by the time
of the year.
Yeah, I mean, by the time you get there, I mean, humanity will have been gone by that point. So it's not. It's one of those things I kind of wish they would have gone to detail, but it wasn't a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, and I think the book does a better job of that. Actually, I think the book does actually detail a lot of the ship too. So you might enjoy that, Luka, because I think they go into very good detail in the book about the ship, everything that looks like, the dimensions and everything. So yeah, that might be a fun thing to be able to check out. So
yeah, and it's just like I said. I mean, when it comes to science fiction, the first thing I like to focus on is the design of the ship, because it kind of tells you like what the characters are going through and what they're thinking, how it's going to be utilized. But that's just me right there. Lee, why don't you go and take us out?
Yeah, no, like I said, I'm glad everyone's here joining us for season 6, right? And like I said, I think a great movie, like you said, Luka, to start with. Had a ton of fun watching it in theaters. Was very happy that it turned out as well as it was. Kind of knowing from The Martian, I was, look back to some of the other stuff that's kind of connected to this and being like, oh gosh, I hope this is, as strong or can stand up to other really strong works from the same author. And, this one definitely, definitely kept up with it, right? I think this was, as I said, a great watch. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Want to thank everyone for checking it out. And, we'd love to hear, like, people that, read the books, like, hey, let us know what things that you feel like was done well, was not done well, because I'm always curious to see, you have to condense this into, a single film. So I'm sure there's stuff that you have to cut out and things that you have to get rid of. I'm curious if there's anything that was missed that would have enhanced the story. So, but thank you everyone for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, and next week we will be a bit more local with our review of Roofman. So be sure to subscribe so you can check that out.